Good morning and welcome to Kim Obey's vlog series on the parables of Jesus. And today we're looking at the parable of the unrighteous steward. So when I was looking through this and reading the book that we're following, so the book's describing it's quite a difficult passage maybe to fully understand. And I thought the same. So on the face of it, we get the idea of the parable, and as Jesus explains it towards the end of the parable, but the initial idea of it can be a bit difficult to grasp. And for me, my sort of fallen part of myself was looking for loopholes or ways that we maybe should act similarly to the unrighteous steward for the benefit of the kingdom. And that is in a way what it's saying, but not quite, or maybe needs some explanation. So it's a parable that has many interpretations, or had many interpretations, and the book that we're following is a really good book because it's got lots of different commentaries that's taking how it can be viewed or perceived, and maybe the more common themes of that. And so we're looking at this, and it's in Luke chapter 16, and starting from verse 1 to verse 13, and it's about the steward who gets caught out really by his manager, and he gets wind that he's going to lose his job, and he thinks, how am I going to get out of this? But not how am I going to get out of it, but what shall I do for my future? And he knows that he can't dig, is one of the things that he says. But what is he going to do? So what he decides to do is he's going to give his customers a price reduction so that they think that he's doing them a favour, and therefore he can draw on that favour in the future. So what is really interesting, and what I found interesting in finding the book, which I hadn't realised before, but the price reductions that he gives to each customer is slightly different, and I hadn't realised why this was. And so the book explains that the way that the steward would have got himself some extra money would have been he would put interest on it, but without making it plain, because it was illegal in Jewish law to put interest on something. Usually they call it, we should call it interest. So it was illegal to do that. What a great idea to make that illegal. So it's such a fair way of doing things. And that's just proving again that God's laws are good, and unfortunately we don't follow that in this world as it goes on in this story. But so to hide the fact that he was putting interest on, they just inflates the price with the total interest on top. So say it was £80, then he'd put another £20 on top and call it £100. So in the story, when he's giving them a price reduction, all he's actually doing is taking the interest that he'd put on off. But the customers don't know this, because it's not that the manager doesn't know that he's done this. So the steward has done this off his own back to get himself some extra money. So what he's done is inflated their price, and then when he's got caught out, and he would get, and that's what the unrighteous part is, that he's inflated the prices. So to stop him from being caught by his manager properly, and then the law would be, he'd be going to prison potentially for this. He then goes and gives them all a price reduction, which is the price that they should have paid to start with. But not only does he give them the price they should have paid, but he's getting in return their favour that he can draw on in the future when he's lost his job. So as the story goes, it's very shrewd, and I hadn't realised that part of it. It's a really important part of the story of what's going on here. It's not that I was thinking that he was just giving a discount, that he was asking them to pay less than his manager was asking. although that would work, but this is a much sort of cleverer way, or it shows how unrighteous he was to start with. So that was made it really interesting to me. And so then, my fallen mind goes, initially I was thinking how the unrighteous steward, so what do? We give the world discounts or whatever. But Jesus is pretty clear what we do as you go later on in the parable. So in chapter 16, verses 8 to 13, Jesus lays out really our how we go and apply this, or how the disciples, or as we are disciples, how we apply it. So in his teachings. But so the idea that we use worldly wealth to promote the kingdom of God, and how we do that is to win people over for the kingdom. In verse 8 to 9 he says this, and not by bribing them, but we use them to show the love and sacrifice of Christ by sacrificing our wealth that we've been given by him anyway, so to as a conduit of being his hands and feet. And we can do this by many different ways, by buying someone food, or donating to charities, or anything that we would do with that money, and not hoarding it for ourselves for our future benefit. And Jesus said that the people of the world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. So Jesus sets apart his disciples from the dishonest manager. So they're not that we'd be dishonest with the money like the manager was. Is that they need to be shrewd or wise with the money, and share it with people to show the love of Christ and bring them into the kingdom. And the disciples, as we are people of the light, and Ephesians 5:8, should act in a shrewd and wise manner. Jesus plainly taught that people of the light should use the worldly wealth, in Luke 16:9, and he says that we cannot serve both God and money, and this is a very important teaching that we tend to struggle with, I would say, that we think that we can be half in the world, half in the kingdom, and it's something that I struggle with. We're teaching from one to the other, and this is where Jesus is teaching that we can't. It says it cannot be done, and unfortunately we probably try. That we can't serve both, because if we choose to serve money or wealth, then it'll skew our thinking or our minds that we won't serve God with that money, or with our time, or with what we do to get that money, because that'll be our main focus. Idolatry is the basis of this, so people idolize their work, or idolize their wealth, or their possessions, and this kind of all comes in from the wealth. It's not just money, it's the whole thing about wealth. So it says that wealth should be the disciples' servant, and not vice versa. So we should use the wealth to serve us. So what wealth God's blessed us with, that we should use that to move the kingdom forward, and not the other way around, and not be a slave to that wealth or to pursuing it. And we can quite easily delude ourselves into thinking that we might be intending to use it in the future, but it's a dangerous game that speaks about many times in the Bible, many parables about it, the rich young ruler, and in many places. The disciples would use their money, and so like the steward, he was expecting to use this wealth that he'd given the person back, unbeknown to them, to buy their approval or their trust, and then he'd be welcomed into their homes because for a time where they might be fed and whatnot, but where to use it to be welcomed into the eternal dwelling, into the kingdom. So we've used the wealth on earth, and we're going to be welcomed into the other kingdom, into the kingdom of God when we get there. So see, Jesus' second application for this is in verse 10 and 12, and he says that if we're faithful in the use of money, that a worldly commodity, let's say, then we can be trusted with greater things. True riches, it says in verse 11, and it seems to refer to the kingdom's spiritual riches, which the disciples are, we are as well disciples, that we partake. And I like the way it says the true riches, as in that money or earthly wealth isn't true riches. But so the third application for this is Jesus drew from the parable was the person cannot serve God and money in verse 13. They're mutually exclusive, and the love of money would drive us away from God, 1 Timothy 6:10, and conversely, the love of God will cause us not to make money our primary concern, so that the love of God will allow us to be more generous or more free with that money, to let it pass through us, from God, through us, to its rightful place, to win hearts over for the kingdom. I hope that listening to today has helped you in understanding it, and hope we can apply it to our lives.